Good afternoon. Chris Gantt-Sorenson with Hansler Sinclair Boyd, and we're really excited to be here with you on December 1. It was an intentionally chosen day as we're starting the holiday season, which so many people feel is synonymous with the Christmas season, which is something we're going to address today. And I have really two exciting guests that will be present with us today. And I'm going to let them speak first, and then we'll cover the legal aspects of what an employer can and cannot do. So I want to go ahead and introduce them. But before I do that, a couple of things to remember. Don't forget to subscribe to our blog. Make sure that if you've got any questions, you can use the question and answer or the chat box to do so, as we've done in the past. And we're going to take those as we go along so that the questions are being answered in live time when we're discussing things. We'll, as usual, share the presentation slides afterwards, and we'll post the presentation. So really excited. I'm going to jump right in and introduce to you Mike Ungar. And I'm going to start with Mike because it was Mike's idea to have this webinar. Mike actually has, as part of his mission, made the workplace religious diversity a focus. He graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point with a Bachelor of Science in Engineering and has an MBA from Clemson. And after nearly 5 years of leading infantry units in the United States Army, he joined Michelin North America and worked there for 35 years. He held managerial roles in continuous improvement, manufacturing, training and development, and recruiting. Retired in May 2020. And today is a focal point business coach and executive coach, helping business leaders improve their profitability. As part of Michelin's diversity inclusion efforts, Mike led the Faith and Beliefs Business Resource Group, whose mission was to create an inclusive environment that enhances productivity, cooperation, and compassion by encouraging understanding, respect, and appreciation for all faiths and beliefs. Mike today is a member of the Workplace Advisory Council to the Tanenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding and serves on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee for the Greenville chapter of Society Human Resource Management with me. This is where we got to talking about this. He's also a graduate of the Riley Institute Diversity Leadership Initiative. And so when Mike and I were talking about this, Mike said, "Do you want me to get somebody from the Tanenbaum Center to come?" And I'm like, "What? Can you do that?" And so here's Nina Boe. Nina is coming to us from Manhattan, where it's 46 degrees. I told her it's about 65 today, a little nicer here today. She's originally from Seattle with an undergraduate background in political science and Eastern European studies. She has a master's in public administration from the University of Washington. She served as a student consultant to a nonprofit organization that worked with religious minorities from Syria, and during that helped craft a policy paper based on survey data. She also interned with Sahar Education, crafting an impact report on that organization's programming in northern Afghanistan. Domestically, she's volunteered with organizations like the International Rescue Committee, Church World Service, and the One Campaign. She also served as a board member for the Young Professionals International Network and Kids for Peace. Internationally, Nina volunteered 2 years in Brazil with the Young Adult Service Corps, working on many communications and community-based ecumenical projects. Before coming to Tanenbaum, she served as a Peace Corps community development volunteer in North Macedonia, working with Roma nonprofit organizations. She's excited to spend some time stateside and support the mission of Tanenbaum. Outside of work, she enjoys photography, writing, and learning new languages. So very excited to have you both with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. We are delighted to be here today. And before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit of an overview of Tanenbaum and who we are. Our full name is the Tanenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding. We are a secular, non-sectarian, nonprofit organization that promotes mutual respect with practical programs that bridge religious difference and combat prejudice. And we do that work in 4 distinct areas. We have a peace-building team that supports a network of grassroots, religiously motivated men and women peacemakers in 28 different countries. Our education team supports K-12 educators to incorporate religious diversity in their classrooms via lesson plans and classroom management techniques. Our healthcare team supports medical professionals with understanding the value of what we call religio-culturally competent care, which is a little bit of a mouthful. But what that means is how patients' religious beliefs may impact the way that they seek medical care. And myself, along with my colleagues on our workplace team, support corporations and large nonprofits to address religious diversity in the workplace. And I just briefly want to restate that we are secular and non-sectarian, so we ourselves are not a religious organization, neither here to promote it nor denigrate it, but we see that religion, belief, and faith can be meaningful and powerful forces in people's lives. Next slide, please. So as you might guess, just with the nature of the work, that when we talk about religion and belief, that this can be very qualitative in nature. So we like to talk about a little bit of data and quantitative sides whenever we can. This graphic is from a survey conducted by our friends over at the Public Religion Research Institute from their 2020 census on American religion. So on the screen is a colorful but busy overview of essentially the religious composition of the United States as of 2020. At a quick glance, what you can see is that the US is still a largely Christian nation, although there is a sizable unaffiliated category. And just a brief high-level overview of some of these results. If you're a data nerd like me, please do feel free to check out the full report. It is really interesting. But prior to the release of this report, we've seen in previous surveys that year after year, there was actually a continuation of two distinct trends across the United States and its religious landscape. The first was a dramatic decrease in those who identify as white and Christian. Previous surveys had noted that that had declined by nearly 1/3, and that was the first time that we saw white Christians drop below 50% of the population during the time that this data has been tracked. The second major trend was the rise of what we call the unaffiliated category, which in this particular survey includes essentially a lot of other religions and traditions that there just wasn't quite enough data to track individually. But again, if you'd like to look into the report, there's a lot more detail there. We saw this unaffiliated category grow from 16% in 2007 to 26% in 2018. And just to break it down a little bit further, looking beyond these two groups, about 5% of the respondents identified with other religions that were delineated specifically. See, at 1% apiece, respondents identified as Jewish, Muslim, and Buddhist. 0.5% identified as Hindu, and 0.2% identified as Unitarian Universalist, with 1% identifying with a different religion that was not specified in the survey. And now, before I move on, just a couple of disclaimers is that because while organizations such as Tanenbaum certainly benefit from this kind of data, we were not the ones to conduct this survey. This particular study denotes some comments and affiliations along religious as well as some racial and ethnic lines, because I think a lot of our identities of different types can really be particularly salient to and inform our religious and spiritual identities. That said, clearly this breakdown is not exhaustive in nature. Likewise, you may note the term Mormon on this slide. The survey and results were released before the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints publicly announced their official request for people to use the proper name of the denomination and not other terminology that may be more commonly used. So with our next slide, as you will see, I would love to take I realize that we don't actually have the question so on that slide, but I will happily throw out a poll for y'all to see as we move on. I would love to get your thoughts on where do you think people are more likely to interact with folks of a different religion than themselves? See, in the workplace, at school, in friendship circles. As Chris mentioned, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, and that has historically been a very non-religious part of the country. And so for me in particular, I really had a very diverse high school and definitely saw it in school and my friendship circles based on school. So it's always fun to see what other people's experiences have been. And I see that 82% of y'all weighing in are saying in the workplace, 12% at school, and 6% in friendship circles. And obviously this will look different depending on where in the country you are. And what we can see is that this trend has definitely been repeated time and again across the country. The workplace is really where people are interacting the most across religious difference, racial differences of sexual orientation and gender identity, difference of politics. This particular graphic was from a survey put out by PRRI, the same organization, and The Atlantic. So likewise, we're seeing about 70%, a vast majority, have these interactions of difference across the workplace. So with our next slide, I would like to share that hopefully it's with next slide, please. Poll popped up again. So hopefully it's a bit less surprising to think that religion may be something that might show up in the workplace. I know I've certainly heard, and my dad certainly heard growing up, is there are certain things we don't talk about in the workplace, and it's religion and politics. But we realize that even though we've been told to not talk about certain things at work, is that this is very much a part of people's lives, impacts who we are as individuals, and can have an impact on people anywhere they are, including at work. On the screen, you'll see some business areas, also not an exhaustive list, but examples of where we might see religion, faith, and belief could possibly have an impact in the workplace. I won't go through each of these, but I'll provide a few examples. And if there's anything that stands out to you or something not here, please feel free to enter that in the chat and throw it out there for people to think about. Corporate social responsibility is one of the ones that always comes to mind to me. Many faiths and traditions strongly value giving back to people's communities, and that may tie into why colleagues, contacts, and friends you have feel very strongly about utilizing any and all opportunities to have a positive impact around you. Certainly top of mind for people today is looking at legal. What relevant laws are in place where you work in your specific state, county, or country? Are there protections you need to be mindful of? We'll hear about that a little bit later from Chris. But also being mindful of this could look different in different countries. Client and customer relations are often top of mind for people as well. When it comes to our products and services, even partnerships, how might we take religious considerations into mind and practice? And likewise, we know that proactively including more communities, identities, and diversity into our inclusion efforts can positively impact recruitment and retention. Next slide, please. So for us at Tanenbaum, as working with essentially as consultants with a number of different organizations, individuals, and companies, we've seen a lot of different topics come up, but some of the most common areas that we've seen have touched on topics such as faith-based employee resource groups or business resource groups, considerations around sensitive and flexible scheduling for commitments, obligations, and holidays, dietary accommodations, being mindful of this may look both religious in nature as well as medical considerations, quiet rooms, such as space for meditation and prayer, taking a break from things. Topics such as multicultural allyship, exploring how do we explore and leverage opportunities to support others, and other topics pertaining to intersectionality, including sexual orientation, gender identity, race, ability, and more. And with that, that's a lot of me talking, but I'd love to pass it over to Mike to share a little bit about some of his experiences and how this has played out in application in the workplace.
Thanks, Nina. I appreciate that. Thanks, Chris, as well. So we wanted to start talking about business resource groups and employee resource groups. And just as a comment, I don't know, some of you may think of it only as employee resource groups. My own bias is to think about these as business resource groups. And it really just helps to drive the focus. The reason you have them, if you will, at least in my view, is to help employees focus on improving the business. And it should have a business focus, I think, at the end of the day. So this example is just a mission statement from a faith and beliefs business resource group. And there are a couple of things I wanted to point out. First of all, the name of the group, Faith and Beliefs, is very deliberate. The idea that not everybody has a faith, some people are none. And so the word belief is to try to be even more broad than just faith alone. One of the other things that's interesting is, I would say about a decade ago, or maybe a little bit longer, some companies began having employee resource groups or business resource groups around faith. And a lot of folks started with, let's say, a Christian group or a Jewish group or a Muslim group. Today, if I'm giving advice or if I'm sharing a perspective, I think it's much more meaningful to have a common group today, one that takes into account, if you're starting from the beginning, all faiths and bringing all faiths together in order to really have that communication and share. So just want to share that as a perspective. Next slide, please. The other thing I think that's important is a little bit about why this topic's important inside the workplace. You know, we start thinking about what's our aspiration. Why would you want to go down the road with this topic? And why would you want to help create, let's say, a culture where people were more comfortable with their faith? Well, here are some thoughts to share, okay? You know, this is what, if you began this journey, this is what a workplace could look like in 5 years, 3 years, or 10 years. highlight a couple of things. For example, when we say where an individual will be comfortable practicing their faith as they wish within the context of work, well, that might be for someone who's Muslim, who might want to pray 5 times a day, let's say during Ramadan, that there's a way that they feel comfortable doing that they aren't afraid to walk away from their desk or their workplace, 5 times during the workday. Doesn't mean they're not getting that work done, but they're comfortable doing that, and people know that's what they're doing because they're supportive of that. You might also see in the third bullet that faith becomes something that actually businesses use to help them in their marketing. A very specific example we know of is that in, let's say, a pharmaceutical group where a new drug is developed, marketing that drug to a specific religious community where perhaps there may be some hesitancy. Engaging a faith-based perspective in helping to do that can be a real plus for the company. Next slide, please. To continue this thought on what the aspiration might be, I kind of want to highlight one more point. If you look at this slide, the third bullet down, this idea that employees feel comfortable communicating with one another. I know for me, I met a lot of employees, I've engaged with a lot of employees who will use the word "have a blessed day" as a greeting or as a departure, if you will. And I also know many employees that would not say that at work. They would say it out of work, but not in work. And when you think about that, they're leaving a little bit of themselves, at the door when they come in if they're not comfortable communicating as they would outside and inside of work. When in fact, the reality is they're just genuine when they want to use that language. So that's something that I would also say as an aspiration for the future. So these are just some examples of things that one might imagine as the company goes down the road on engaging on faith-based communications, what that might look like, or faith-based efforts, what their workplace might look like in a few years. Next slide, please. Nina?
Thank you, Mike. So looking at some of the bigger, taking a step back and looking at this from a broader perspective is that, other ways that this shows up is that there's a little bit more data that we have discovered over the years. We'll make sure that this link is shared out. We do have some resources available for free that kind of go into this data a little bit deeper. But Tanenbaum's own survey of what American workers really think about religion discovered that there are some trends across the country that kind of, again, contextualize why is this conversation important to have? Why is religious diversity an important aspect of diversity and inclusion in the workplace? See that our survey shows that 15% of workers said that they discussed religion with their coworkers at least a few times a week. 22 said that they discuss religion occasionally. So we're seeing that well over a quarter of people certainly have these conversations in the workplace actively, say nothing of how it might still be a topic of importance that maybe people don't discuss, but it does, as Mike said, can impact the way that they engage and behave. We also note that it said that when the topic of religion comes up, that 77% of workers reported feeling somewhat or very comfortable. But then we also notice that may look different across people of different religious and faith-based background. 55% of atheist and agnostic or secular workers said that they felt comfortable or very comfortable when the topic of religion comes up. And it's one of those things that we can see that ensuring that we have a welcoming and inclusive and respectful workplace when the topic of religious diversity does come up can really make sure that people feel that they are welcome to engage or not engage when these particular conversations do occur. Next slide, please.
Just to continue to go down this road on the conversation about, are people leaving themselves, a part of themselves at the door when they come to work with regard to their faith. This is actually an individual's comment in response to a discussion about why individuals need to be comfortable to share their beliefs in a respectful manner. If you look at that, this individual's faith was Catholic. She was a Catholic, and in this particular case, she actually censored herself when having a conversation with her team because she wasn't sure that the team would understand her or how important her faith was to her. even when she was at work. And really the point in sharing this is, please don't think that you don't have employees who themselves are actually leaving part of themselves at the door if they're very much committed to their faith. It is something that happens, and I think it happens more often than we realize because we just don't talk about it. And that's part of this conversation, is how do we create that meaningful exchange in the workplace? Nina?
Thank you, Mike. A little bit more context from our survey also showed that, there's more to this conversation than simply talking about religion and belief in the workplace. Is that sadly, we know that, not everyone has had the best experience when we're talking about religion and belief in the workplace. That sadly, incidences of bias and harassment have also come up. So that 1/3 of respondents said that they have seen or experienced themselves incidents of religious bias in their workplace. We also noted that 50% of non-Christians stated that they felt their employees are ignoring their religious needs. This was broken down a little bit further by saying nearly 6 in 10 atheists felt that people look down on their beliefs, but also nearly 1/3 of white evangelical Protestants felt the same, including 1/3 of non-Christian. And so it's one of those things that when we tie all of this back to, that educational aspect, when we look at what we call religio-culturally competent care, it's the kind of thing about how do we increase our awareness and education and learning around all these different backgrounds of what that means in my geographic location, what that means in y'all's geographic location, realizing that just because we may not necessarily be hearing about these conversations, like Mike was saying, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. It doesn't mean that there isn't that diversity in place. It's just a matter of how do we ensure that we can proactively and positively impact our workplaces so that we can avoid these instances of bias, that we can create these welcoming spaces. Next slide, please. And so these are just a few examples of better practices that can really set us up for success when we talk about creating inclusive workplaces. Things like scheduling, and we can always reference and incorporate even multi-faith calendars. At Tanenbaum, we don't recreate the wheel. There are some really great resources out there, such as the multi-faith calendar from the Harvard Divinity School. The ADL and NCCJ both have similarly really great calendars that you can reference. Those complemented with our fact sheets from Tanenbaum, looking at specific holidays and the workplace implications therein, can really allow us some more space to kind of like an easy kind of, we say, low-hanging fruit, to kind of have an opportunity to explore a little bit more in a way that is not placing the work of, finding out more about a specific faith or tradition on the person of that tradition, but rather things that we can easily grab and incorporate into our communications, blogs, etc. Another great point is diet, ensuring that if there's going to be food at a specific event, or say, food for people to grab in a workplace kitchen, making sure that we're clear about any allergens as well, but also noting ingredients that, people might want to be mindful of if their religion or belief, has them following a certain dietary restriction. Things like being mindful of if something is kosher, halal, vegetarian, vegan. Other traditions as well are mindful of dairy and meat. So just being mindful of what this food is, and just asking people if, if there's anything that we need to take into mind if we're going somewhere for food. Communication is really a big one. It's something that, we can certainly implement as an organization across, specific marketing and communication teams, but it also ties into interpersonal communication, individual exchanges as well, so that we can really practice respectful communication with everyone. And that kind of coming from a genuine place of respectful curiosity can go a long way, because even at Tanenbaum, I certainly don't know everything about every religion out there. But if I'm going to have that learning opportunity to engage with someone of a different background, if I just look at that from a point of genuine respectful curiosity, that's going to go a lot farther than, positioning myself as a place, well, I don't understand that. Like, how do you do this? But it's one of those things that communication and being respectful can be implemented in every kind of interaction that we have. And last but certainly not least, ensuring that if we're talking about a company, a firm, an organization, is that there's always the opportunity to look at, what kind of policies are in place around this, not only around accommodations, but things like anti-proselytization policies, floating holidays, etc. There are a lot of different ways that religious accommodation and consideration can be taken into account. Next slide, please. I think Mike is going to share a little bit about what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, so this is a part of a calendar of what it could look like. And these are, you see here, this is really taking information from the resources that Nina just spoke about and highlighting the different holidays for the variety of faiths. And in fact, it's really a work in progress. What's real interesting about this is actually in some ways the calendar is the easiest thing to put together, because then you've got the question of on which holidays do you want to avoid scheduling major company events. So there are obviously some holidays that are more important to others than less. And then the second question is, if someone wants to observe a particular holiday, how do you handle that within your policy? So I think the challenge that we face with this sort of a thing is, instead of burying our heads in the sand, if you will, and not talking about it, you get the calendar together, and then you begin to talk about how you deploy it within your company. But again, I don't want to understate the challenge that can be for policies and practices as well. Next slide. And then finally, Nina spoke about some competencies for respectful communication, and these are some things that are some tips in terms of how to really handle the conversation around faith. And I think I just want to highlight a couple of them as we look at this slide. You talk about number 3. I think most people know the platinum rule, but the golden rule is do unto others as I would like to have done to me. And in fact, the platinum rule is do unto others as they wish to have done to them. In other words, how do they want to be addressed? What's important to them? A lot of this conversation around faith is asking others for their perspective, listening actively. And I think number 9 is probably one of the more important things, at least from my perspective. It's being genuine. None of us, if you're not familiar with another person's faith and you make a faux pas and you say something that's not intended to be offensive, but might come across as insensitive, acknowledge that and apologize. We're all going to be human with that. And if we take on a very genuine approach to this and a very humble approach to this, that's usually the best way to communicate with one another. With that, I'm going to hand it back off to Chris and let her talk more about the legal side of faith in the workplace. Chris?
Thank you, Mike and Nina. And so one of your prongs was address the behavior, not the belief. And I wondered if you might speak to that a little bit before I popped on.
Certainly. It's one of those things that is one of my favorite, points to always highlight, is because, regardless, not us at Tanenbaum, not any of your employers or organizations with which you're affiliated are here to tell you what to believe. And we're not here to talk about theology or debate that content. But when we talk about behavior, those are things that any workplace we walk into, we are coming together with our values around our place of employment and that community, and realizing that even if I have a different, perspective in what I believe, and that could even be within my own faith tradition. I might have very different beliefs than someone I go to church with. Right. But what that looks like in practice is that even if I have a very different perspective than anyone else, it means that we can come together and respectfully engage and interact with each other and have that common shared behavior, even if we don't necessarily have a common shared belief.
Thank you. And I was also thinking about it in the context of, I was thinking about it in the context of when you have poor behavior at work in the name of religion. And so I think it can be very helpful for employers on that front as well. So let's jump into what Title VII says about expression of religion in the workplace. Very important, because I think lawyers, myself included, have found it easier to say, look, just don't have any communication about it. Well, that's not right. And I've certainly been guilty of it. And part of the reason that lawyers recommend that is because it's a slippery slope. It has a propensity to slide downhill fast. It can get contentious. These were things we thought before the current, climate. Everybody's contentious about everything now. But that doesn't mean that you should exclude it at work. And in fact, if you do that, if you absolutely ban any discussion about it, you are violating Title VII. So the EEOC, who is the arbiter of Title VII, the one who enforces, issues the guidance, issues the regulations, and enforces any violations, they say religious expression is not prohibited by Title VII, and in fact, it is permitted. And if you ban it, then you are potentially violating Title VII. So the EEOC says you've got to allow your employees to engage in religious expression at work so long as it does not create an undue hardship or amount to harassment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because that can be, a narrow line at times. Religion is a protected status. The most of the protected statuses that folks talk about are race, gender, disability, age. Some of the lesser knowns are, national origin, military status, and religion. It is protected status. So someone's religion has the same force in regards to any sort of employment decisions or any sort of treatment of them as the race, the gender. And this rule applies to all traditional religions as well as any other sincerely held religious belief. And then the EEOC, in regards to their investigations that they perform, will also look at any moral or ethical beliefs in the same vein as a sincerely held religious belief. And so that's important to know too. And to Mike's point, he mentioned that his group, his business resource group, was not limited to just religions. They also had beliefs as part of the title and part of what they honored. And that would be required by the EEOC. So what can an employer be liable for? I think that's the most important thing to think about, because I think employers think in regards to this that they might be liable for any communications about it or any sort of expression about it. An employer can be liable for discrimination or harassment. The harassment by the employer or a supervisor or other employees of other employees. And this is going to apply to applicants as well as employees. And so discrimination is unfavorable treatment on the basis of my religion and applies to either intentional discrimination or unintentional discrimination that has a disparate impact on a protected class. In the context of religion, what does that look like? So if you are a workplace that is closed on Sundays for exercise of religion, but you're open the other 6 days of the week, can you accommodate someone whose Sabbath is Friday to Saturday? Can you accommodate someone whose Sabbath is other days? That sort of thing. If you are a workplace that you're a 7-day, 24/7 workplace, and you honor when folks need to go to church, you're going to have to legally do that for other religions when they are practicing their faith. Those are the types of things that we're talking about as far as unfavorable treatment. And then we also have the very obvious unfavorable treatment where people are fired just because they are Muslim. These things happen. We've heard about it in recent years. Ostracized, denied opportunities, given poor task, not permitted the same training experiences, not permitted the same resources, not offered assistance up. I've always said about discrimination in the workplace that generally most employers get it right. The training is the same for everybody. It's who you're giving the hand up to, who are the individual folks that are in charge of bringing up the other folks up. Who are they giving a hand up to? And I'll tell you, most people do that with people that look like them and think like them. And so that to me is the sleeper issue. When an employer, when their leaders are deciding who are they going to help, who are they picking? Well, religion's going to impact this as well. Absolutely, especially in the upstate, especially in South Carolina and states like South Carolina. So it's important to think about discrimination broadly. Harassment is unwelcome conduct. Now, this is very important. I dropped it right from EOC because I like how they put it. And it occurs in 2 instances. One, when employees are required or coerced to abandon, alter, or adopt a religious practice as a condition of employment. Abandon. Now, to both Mike and Nina's point, if I cannot come to work and engage in religious expression because my religion is a minority religion and it's not the generally recognized religion, even though the employer doesn't realize that I don't feel like I can do that because of all the communications that are affirmative about Christianity, or all the communications from the employer itself that, it honors Christianity, I might be able to prove that I've been required to abandon my religion in order to come to work. More important, Mike and Nina's point is also, I'm not bringing my whole self to work. If I can bring my whole self to work, I'm going to do a better job. But it's also something that employers need to think about in regards to how they're dealing with this, from the aspect of, are we requiring folks to abandon their religion at work? And it's going to be like any other area of diversity issues. A lot of times folks don't even speak up when they are outside of the majority because they don't feel comfortable. So you might not even know. And disparate impact still can be discriminatory, even if you don't know. So that's number one situation: abandon, alter, or adopt a religious practice as a condition of employment. Number two is, are they subjected to unwelcome statements or conduct that is based on their religion, and that these unwelcome comments are so severe or pervasive that they create a hostile and abusive workplace to the reasonable person standard. And so that's the law around it. And this is when an employer can be guilty, can be liable. In addition, if they are having an absolute ban of religious expression or preferring one religion over another. Next slide. So the EEOC has some great recommendations, which happen to dovetail squarely with what Nina and Mike recommended. Have training on the discussion of religious expression, and go ahead and say, hey, you should feel comfortable speaking about religion. And you can incorporate this in politics too, right? It's just that when you do it to the point where you're disrupting the workplace, or you do it to the point where you are imposing your views on people, then you've crossed the line and you've violated our policies. You violate Title VII with the religion, and with the political, you are violating, any sort of nonviolence, any sort of policies that require you to be sensitive, and you're also interfering with business operations. An employer under the law never has to accommodate an expression of a religious belief where such an accommodation would cause harassment of other coworkers. And I have a lot of instances where situations come to mind when I'm thinking about these comments, these tenets that employers have to abide by. And there was one employee specifically who would bring his Bible to work. And while he was supposed to be working on his machine, he would instead proselytize, but also, talk about how people were going to go, to hell if they didn't do this and didn't do that, and just really driving it home. So obviously this is someone who feels very passionately about their faith, and they are violating Title VII. And the employer was concerned about what to do, because this employee is talking about religion. But the religious expression that this employee was engaging in needed to be stopped quickly and dealt with in a disciplinary fashion, not to mention the fact that the employee was not doing his machine. He wasn't meeting his goals, his production goals. The EEOC says employers should train managers, and I think this is a really important point, to gauge the actual disruption posed by religious expression in the workplace rather than speculating disruption may result. I think that's important because it'd be easier just to ban it. It'd be easier as a manager, you've already got so much to do, just to say, no, y'all get back to work, we're not going to do this. But, the reason you want to teach them to gauge it is simply because you don't want them making you, as the employer, they're your master-servant agency relationship. You're liable for what they do in the workplace, whether you know it or not, as long as it's within the scope and course. And if they're shutting this down because they think that's the way to deal with it, they are going to make an employer potentially vicariously liable for not permitting religious expression at work. So the other side of that, though, is managers can't shut down and go, okay, we can't do anything about people saying religious, engaging in religious comments. And it's managers' jobs are hard. They're the eyes and ears of the company. And they can't shut down on the other side and decide, There's nothing I can do about it. So I'm not going to figure out whether or not it's unwelcome. I mean, and this is hard because it's subjective. It's almost like you have to hear it and know that's too far. It is easier to outright ban it, which is why lawyers recommend just don't let it happen. So the other thing that I think is a really important point is employers are focused on certain types of violations depending on the time, just like the public, society is. And an employer cannot restrict religious expression more heavily than other forms of expression that have a similar impact on workplace efficiency. So politics, anti-vax, vaccinations, Biden's executive orders, all of the things that everybody's talking about. Me Too movement prior to that, George Floyd, Black Lives Matters. I'm an advisor to employers. I love my job. We've been talking about these things a lot because the employees are out in society. This is what they're thinking. They bring it in. So it's important to keep that in mind. A lot of secular employers just don't talk about religion, and they don't honor it. And they do some things, the schedulings are great points. They do some things that send a message to those that are in minority religions that by the silence and by the inaction, they are creating evidence that can be used in support of a claim when added with other things before the EEOC. Next slide. So Mike had mentioned people should be able to say, have a blessed day. And I thought about that because I see a lot of, I see leaders in workplaces having Bible quotes at the end of their signature block. And, I see them saying those things. And so that really challenged me, Mike, because my position's always been that shouldn't be. My position's always been, if you're a leader in the workplace, and even if as an employee, we shouldn't have that on our signature block. It's the workplace signature block. This isn't an opportunity for us to express personal views of any nature. We're at work and we're representing work. And so I looked into it and come to find out there is some support, and some courts have gone the other way too, but there's some support for courts saying religious expression and using it as a salutation, which was the point you made, is protected. It's protected religious expression under Title VII. And so obviously we have to see that there's a nuance between me saying to you as an employee, have a blessed day, even maybe may God be with you. That might be getting, a little bit too far. But that's my salutation. That's me saying hello and goodbye. We have to be prepared for, I saw the Day of the Dead on there, we have to be prepared for comments about that. We have to be prepared for other comments that we have to be acceptable about as measure of salutation, which will invariably happen if people feel aggravated by my religious expression of have a blessed day. But there are cases that say that's permissible religious expression, and particularly when it's an employee. Employers, I think, have to be more careful. And so that's why I included this information here. Private employers are free to include religious expression in their trainings, meetings, or other functions, their own personal religious expression. Now, when we say private employers, I'm at a law firm. I think we have 100 and something attorneys at this point. I don't know the exact number. I am one of many people here. So when I'm representing the firm, if I stand up and talk about my personal beliefs, that's probably not right, because I'm a leader in the firm and I'm thinking my personal beliefs are those of everyone. So I don't think that's advisable. A lot of employers are Christian-based. If your mission is Christian-based or some other denominational base, if that is your mission and that is the reason you exist, that is permissible under Title VII. If you are an organization that espouses any type of religion, but that is not your mission, as an employer, if you are incorporating this into your business meetings, functions, trainings, I think you're stepping potentially over the line. I've represented an employer who had a temple and a picture of the Holy Mother from India in their workplace, and they started every meeting with a prayer. And it was in a predominantly Christian, which, to Nina's good statistic points, that's not uncommon throughout the nation, but a predominantly Christian workforce. The message was that, you had to do this and that this was required as a term and condition. So the answer is it doesn't happen. The EEOC does not require employers to not do it. What they say is if someone wants to be excused from the meetings because of this, that the employer has to grant that. So I think this is a slippery slope area. I think an employer needs to be very careful if they are going to express their own personal religious expression, that they do what Mike is suggesting and come up with this calendar that is also sending the message of we're inclusive. We don't assume that everybody is the faith that we are. And that's what I would want to see if I were your lawyer and you were like, we're going to put up the Christmas tree this year. We're going to have a Christmas party and we're going to send a Christmas card. There was one client who had an employee who objected to being included on the Christmas card. And this was years ago. And they said, she's just a troublemaker. That's a problem. She was uncomfortable, understandably so. She should be excused from the Christmas card, or we could call it a holiday greeting. So we just have to be careful. And we look at those statistics that Tanenbaum has, and we realize, we are not the majority, but we certainly, we are the majority, but we continue to act like the majority, and diversity is increasing in religion in every area. Next slide. So the conflict between religious discrimination and harassment. An employee who isn't permitted to express religious beliefs may feel discriminated against. And so today, I don't normally do this. Mike said that somebody censors themselves at work. Well, I do that too. So here's what I've got on today. And I'm trying because I can't really very well operate my little nebulous camera here, but I'm wearing my cross. So I love my cross. And I'm also, so if I wear this, is that all right? Is that all right? A fair form of religious expression for me to do within the EEOC? Obviously, yes, right? Here's the other thing from my church that I wear. It's hopefully not upside down. It was upside down. This is it represents the LGBTQIA plus community, and it's a cross. We are a welcoming church, deliberately welcoming church to the LGBTQ plus community. Oh boy, do I get a lot of comments about that from relatives, from everybody. I've never worn this to work. I might bring it to work if I'm walking over to church to work during the day at work, but I'm too chicken to wear it to work. And I am somebody who started talking very firmly about Title VII protecting the LGBTQ community very publicly long before that was popular, arguing with people that Title VII didn't need to be rewritten to protect them, that sex meant sex and that included them. And yet I'm still scared to wear this at work. So, if I wear this, I'm sure I'm going to get some comments, maybe. If I get some comments and they say, tell me about this, and I don't think they're unwelcome, is that harassment? It's not. But if I express, this is making me uncomfortable, which I hope I won't do. I hope if someone asked this, I would say, this is LGBTQ plus, we're a church that's a particular, specifically and purposefully inclusive church on this front, and others too. And then they say, well, that goes against my religion. And I've certainly done trainings where I've said, you need to let folks use the restroom of the restroom that they identify with. And I've had managers in the training say, that's against my religion. And I've had to say, you're imposing your religion on other employees if that's the position you take. Not very popular position to say, but that's my job. So if someone starts saying that, I'm being harassed. Now, if it keeps up, that's creating a severe and pervasive workplace. And an employer's job is to put a stop to that. If I walk around and I say, if you don't believe this, then you aren't a Christian. You need to read blah, blah, blah in the Bible, then I am imposing my religion on them. And so I use this rather simple example to say, what can you allow? What can you not allow? If I want to read my Bible at lunch, great. I can do it in the kitchen too. If I take my Bible and I talk to people about it, might be going too far. If I'm sitting with people who also are Christian and I know that, and it's not unwelcome for them, but it's possibly causing concern for others around, or I'm not being sensitive to others around, I might be going too far. So, this is harder to police, but it's important to do, to the good point that we want to all come to work and bring all of us, because then we'll be a better employee at work. So I'm not permitted to express my beliefs. I'm going to feel discriminated against. Conversely, an employee who is subjected to a coworker's religious stations may feel harassed. And those are the examples I've just given. And I think this increases. I think we are, just like with any other minority, we are responsible as an employer to be particularly sensitive to the minority religions. So employers know, we talked about this, Tanenbaum statistics show it, it's a mix of divergent beliefs that we've got to be aware of. And an employer has to balance those religious beliefs with the rights of other employees to be free from the harassment. And that's difficult. That's difficult. However, remember this, in regards to harassment, one isolated comment is not typically going to be grounds for liability. Just address the comments when they come up and be able to show that you've done so. And that's what Title VII requires. It doesn't require perfection. Next slide. So, underrepresented religious minorities, 3/4 of the country's population are Christians, according to some statistic I found somewhere when I was pulling these together that I didn't cite, which could or could not be plagiarism. We'll talk about that offline with the marketing department if I've overstepped. But some of the studies show that, to Mike and Nina's point, that workers who have a different religion from others in the workplace are more likely to have a poor experience at work. And here we are, December 1, Christmas absolutely overshadows it. We've got a Christmas tree in our whatever, our welcoming area, our reception area. They're all over the place. No menorahs. I see no menorahs. So Christmas absolutely overshadows religious holidays. Maybe employers choose decorations carefully. Have none. Have secular ones like those awful red poinsettias downstairs they also put down. Or, maybe have a diversity committee that's for the purpose of these types of events that comes, and they're all representing from varying faiths, where they come together and they actually use it as an opportunity to put out some of the symbols representing their faith holidays. And we have a meeting where we allow them to explain it to the group. Wouldn't that be a great idea? I think that'd be wonderful. Offer floating holidays. What about if instead you had a schedule where you offered holidays, even though the business isn't closed, you offered holidays for Yom Kippur, for Hanukkah, for some Diwali. I didn't know Day of the Dead was a religious pagan holiday that we had to honor. I'm going to have to go look that up and see. It's a growth opportunity for me. Or a floating holiday that could be used at any time. And I know that happens some with Good Friday. Well, it could be used for anything. And it also can be used by those employees who have no faith, right? Who have no beliefs, but that want to take a day to use as their floating holiday, like their birthday or something. It should be equally provided. And we already talked about scheduling, so let's pop on to the next slide. This is a resource. It's just been updated from the EOC, and I highly recommend it. And it is a compliance manual. And what that means is not only is it good for employers, it's what the investigators use when they look into religious discrimination issues. And I'm going to ask Nina, she mentioned a couple of resources that she could also drop here. So before we send the slides to you, I'm going to ask her to provide those and anything, Mike, that you want to provide. But, there's no easy answer to it. But the easy answer might get you in trouble with Title VII. And then there's every reason in the world to adopt a workplace that's more inclusive. I thought the marketing point that you made, Mike, was a good one. It increases the footprint. Anytime we have people who are diverse and different in all walks of life in our workplace, we're increasing the footprint in every aspect. It's a no-brainer for purposes of business and marketing. But is there anything that either of you, Nina or Mike, would like to add? I don't think we really have any questions. I've been keeping up with it.
I think I'd jump in, and I love the comments in the chat is also kind of driving home a lot of the points that we've all touched on, ensuring that, like you've been saying, is that, we don't want to have people feel excluded, but looking at holiday festivities being kind of conflated with Christmas in particular. And that's a great point, is that, there are resources. Another one I'll add is that, we've got a diverse array of holidays that take place within this kind of November all the way through December, even into January time. Some of them are fixed, like Christmas and Kwanzaa, but then we also have a number of religions and traditions that follow lunar calendars, lunisolar calendars. So, we've got the fact that right now we're in the midst of Hanukkah, and not long ago we saw, Diwali, and even beginning then kind of like the end of October into November with, Day of the Dead, Dia de Muertos, and, All Souls Day, getting into also pagan traditions such as kind of the equinox and Samhain, and then getting into things like Lunar New Year, again, this year in February, but that can also change. So there are times where all of these holidays may happen at once. They're at least certainly all in the neighborhood of each other. So to everyone's points, realizing that, these opportunities to learn more and realize that there's a lot more going on and there's a lot more we can do.
So I like what you're saying, Nina. And, I think about if we as an employer, we send out birthdays or whatever, if an employer sends out, hey, today is this, hey, today is that, that is starting the conversation. That is putting it out there. It has more value than what it is, because it's saying we are a welcoming workplace. The employer is doing it, and the employer is alerting folks. And that's an easy thing to do.
Just to add to one other thing that made me think about in your last slide about a group of diverse folks coming together to talk about how to handle December. One of the things we haven't talked about is some ways to do that effectively. And one of the things that's always great to do is to have this conversation around food. Everybody likes food. And a lot of different foods are faith-based. And so for people to bring in their foods and talk about, hey, my grandmother made this, my grandmother recipe, or we have this all the time at this event or this holiday, begin to share from that perspective. It can be a great way to have that conversation in a very interesting way, where people just are interested in each other and those traditions. So food, we found, is often a wonderful way to start some of these conversations where you're not sure where to start.
That's a great idea. No, that's a great idea. Well, I liked all of the tips that y'all shared that employers can do. And, another one would be have a private space where folks can go and engage in any sort of prayer or other practices that they need to engage in through the day. And have it marked in a non-denominational way and alert the employees to it. I just think that's great. And just, again, is sending a stronger message than what's being said. And so I've really appreciated all the ideas. Y'all have got the contact information for Mike and Nina. Contact the Tanenbaum Center, and get them to provide some resources for your folks to get this conversation started. Make it easy. Nina said she didn't reinvent the wheel on some points. Y'all don't reinvent the wheel. Get Tanenbaum to pop in and do this for you. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to do it in December, because a lot of toes will be unintentionally stepped on here in the next little bit. It'd be an opportunity to change the conversation. So Nina, Mike, thank you so much. I think this has been great. I'm so glad we did this. I feel like the attendees got some great information. They're saying so in the chat. And I hope that they'll feel free to reach out to you if they've got any other points. And thanks for your work, Mike, your volunteer work in this area, and raising it up for discussion.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you all.
Thanks for joining this webinar presented by Hainsworth Sinclair Boyd. To learn more about the firm and its services, visit hsblawfirm.com.